Hello and welcome to Murphy's Garden, and I hope you'll enjoy this video. I certainly enjoyed making it, and it was a chance to go back to Wollerton Old Hall. Wollerton is a garden that I very much admire, and you'll see even being here in this sunken garden in our own garden, the influences that we've taken from Wollerton. Wollerton, we've done videos on it before. We visited it earlier in the year to look at the structure and to take kind of structural ideas, and this time we've returned in the summer months, seeing the garden in its full summer splendour. But even better than that, having the opportunity to speak to Lesley Jenkins, the owner and designer of this garden, along with her husband John. So it was a wonderful opportunity to meet her. So without further ado, I'll take you to our interview with Lesley, and the context of it is we're sitting in her kitchen just having a very informal chat about the making of Wollerton Old Hall. And I'll just overlay our conversation with images of the garden and when we visited in August, and it was a beautiful summer's evening and the garden looked truly magical. I'm here with Lesley Jenkins from Wollerton Old Hall. I'm so excited to be here and to meet you. Award-winning designer Chris Beardshaw described Wollerton Old Hall as a world-class example of an English garden, and I certainly agree. But how would you describe your garden?
Golly, that is a long one. Well, I originally set out to do an informal garden. Ended up with a very formal garden with lots and lots of inspiration from other places. Basically, I was a very frustrated theatre designer, and I wanted the garden to mimic the theatre in a way, with flats and entrances and exits and that sort of thing. But I didn't become a theatre designer. I did fine art in the end.
So the garden you have created is very clever in that it uses all these borrowed views. How did you go about designing the garden? Did you design the garden in its entirety, like put it all on paper and do the whole thing, or did you do it sort of very gradually? Did it evolve naturally over a period of time?
It did evolve very much so. To start with young children or young boys, it was a cricket pitch and a rugby pitch and everything. And when we bought this house again in 1982. It was just a field. So yes, it's evolved, and it still is evolving. I didn't plan it on paper. I do now. As I get older, I plan it on paper, but not trained in any way. Only horticulturally, I'm not trained either, but only in horticulture. I love plants and things like that, and I've grown up amongst plants, learning. Originally, I was very influenced by Bressingham Gardens in Norfolk, that way, with not so much the design, but the fact that appealed to me as an artist, that you could look through plants, which I like doing. They weren't just bang in front of you. So we set out to do that once the rugby pitches had gone, and did lots of curved borders, but they looked ghastly. They didn't look right. And I decided to scrap all that, because I'm quite good at scrapping things, you know. At the same time, it has an emotional tie with my childhood and my parents and my family, obviously. And it's very difficult trying to keep that emotional tie and ethos, and yet wanting to do other things in the garden.
So when you came here, were you an experienced gardener from a previous garden, or did you learn everything you've learned in this garden?
No, we had gardens before, John and I. Both of us were brought up, both parents. John's mother particularly was very keen on gardening. My father was a farmer, really, basically, and just ploughed everything up. So my mother was the artistic part of the family, really. But in those days, I mean, we're going back here a long time, you couldn't have the garden centres. You used to have to buy bare-rooted everything. Nothing was in pots. And in fact, my mother's only influence on me was the long border, which we call the main perennial border, because she planted that up, but always bare root stuff and everything. But she got a good eye for colour as well. And I think that influenced me, and also my love of plants. My father appreciated stuff, but he wasn't. He was more into ploughing.
And you said about your husband. Is your husband as keen as you are on gardening, or are there certain roles that you naturally do and he does?
Yes, very much so. I mean, John is the plantsman, really. He's shrubs, trees, all that. He's a horticulturalist, really. He's the one who knows his stuff.
So you mentioned about the, your love of theatre design, which I think comes across very clearly. Obviously this interest is strongly reflected in the design of the garden. Was there a particular theatre or play or anything that you had in mind when you designed the garden, or was it just the general desire to kind of create drama and intrigue? Is that the kind of thing you were trying to do?
Yes, you're spot on there. Yeah, I mean, I love Shakespeare anyway, Shakespeare plays. So perhaps some of that has rubbed off, but. Yeah, we've always, I've always liked the theatre very much so, and took part in Ammy-Drammy things. And my mother was a producer, not professionally, but with amateur things. And I just love that sort of feel. And Wollerton, I think, lends itself to that now, because when I was a child and then we came back as a child, it was a wild garden, completely covered in seeded roses and things, and had a very beautiful atmosphere about it, and I wanted to keep that, like the secret garden in a way. The well garden particularly, we think of as more of a secret garden, with the entrances being the ivy tunnel and things like that.
I'm really interested in the construction of the garden, and what I think is so special to most of us that come round Wollerton is the layout, that although it's very clever and well designed, it sort of seems achievable to us kind of amateur gardeners, because it doesn't perhaps involve costly big changes in levels or hard landscaping, but rather it's been achieved by the right plants and especially hedges and lots of patience over years. You can see that. Did you have builders in to help you to do this, or did you and your husband just mostly kind of do the work yourself over a period of time?
Well, to start with, as I said, after the rugby field bit and the informal bit, we actually then, the two boys, when they were home from school, would pack baler string either end, and we just do it from the bedroom window, move over a bit, nothing was technical, unfortunately. I wish it had. Consequently, the garden isn't actually straight in any way or form. It appears to be on the ground. From a drone, you can see the differences in, and also it's not level, the garden. It looks flat. It's not. It slopes quite a lot down towards the river side. Yeah, but no, it was all done really, and on a shoestring. John was working and I was teaching, and at the time, as you probably know, is limited, isn't it, when you're busy working? And so that's how we started, very basic. We have had builders in on occasion to do things. One particular disaster of mine is I decided I would design a small garden, and I did it on paper, which I've never done before. And the builder came and built a wall around it. And as soon as he's putting the last brick in, I thought, God, this looks awful. So John said, John, it's awful. I can't bear this. And he said, well, if you take it down yourself, I don't mind. So I took it down myself, not the builder. So, taught me a lesson, really taught me a lesson.
I think that's it, when you employ somebody to come in to do something, whereas when you're doing it yourself, you can say, oh, no, that's not right, stop.
Yeah.
Whereas you can't do that, which we find we've done that, haven't we? What would you say was your favourite part of the garden?
No, I haven't really got one. It depends on the season. And I do try to keep an atmosphere in it, which is difficult, because when you open your garden, as you probably learnt, you find that you're trying to keep it neat, with no weeds for the public, and you don't always want that. You want a certain amount of tidiness. Difficult keeping the ethos and
keeping it a relaxed family garden when it...
Yes. And if you move anything, you get, oh no, they've moved that seat, and that was our favourite seat, all that sort of thing. The plants are another cup of tea. You mentioned back planting, because that's where I come in with the art bits, the fine art bit. And I was lucky enough to have a brilliant tutor at Birmingham. I went to Birmingham Art College and then Liverpool University, and he was brilliant with colour. He was pretty tough to work under and with, but he told me about perspective and colour and how colours bounce back and graduations, things like that. I owe him a lot.
The next question I wanted to ask you, Wollerton has, as I've said, has had a big influence on the type of garden that I'm trying to create. We're still on that journey, but we're in the process. But what gardens have influenced you as you set out to design Wollerton? Was there a particular garden
that you tried to emulate or took inspiration from?
Yes, lots. A lot. Well, of course, there's the ultimate Sissinghurst, isn't there? And I actually did create, again, going back to my mistakes, I did create a rather a nice white garden down where the well garden is now, and it was a white garden, but got fed up with that, too obvious. So got rid of that. It's been through many stages, different parts of the garden over the years. The well gardens passed through 6 stages at least, complete getting rid of everything and starting again, all with our own. I mean, I can't physically do it now, but with basically not employing a lot of people. Yeah, we've got a fantastic person come back now, Nick, who was our original head gardener. He's retired and come back now. He's incredible. Yeah, so at them, obviously, he'd cut, of course. But I find, and you do probably, as you get older, you critique more garden. You have to find a pretty special garden that you're happy with. I'm influenced by Scampston up in Yorkshire. I think that's a brilliant garden. Plasbronno, Danu in Wales. That was one of the big influences. Clough William Ellis's real garden. Powys, of course. Powys, brilliant. Where else? It depends really, quite a lot. And of course at the beginning, Bressingham, because I still think it's lovely to have a bed of flowers and be able to look through them.
I feel like I've kind of sort of got the layout of my garden sorted in my head at least, but what I'm really struggling with at the moment is trying to get the planting right in some of the areas. And I've got these big long herbaceous borders that looked quite nice in May and early June, but then now seem very sort of patchy and incoherent. I think what I'm struggling with is trying to get plants that have that long season of interest. I have got a tendency, I just go out and buy something because I like it and plonk it in. So I've really got to get better. Have you got any advice on how to do that better?
Gosh, tell me. I don't know. I think you have to rely on your sense of colour and form, because they're very important, aren't they? Colour, form, texture, all that, the usual cliches. And I find certain stalwarts in this time of year, dahlias are so important to fill up the gaps, And as I get older, I like bright colours, whereas I was all pinks and whites in my 20s, 30s. Now I love it. And of course, you get a lot of people say, I don't like the hot, don't like the hot, I don't like orange, But I love orange and blue and all the things like that count. It is difficult.
It's funny how fashions kind of come and go, because we were saying that ourselves, weren't we? That a few years ago I was quite sort of anti-orange, but now really loving it now.
Yeah. And also, of course, Gertrude Jekyll, which I'm sure you've read any of her colour schemes are brilliant. That and what I try to do is start off with keeping that sort of thing. And thanks to my tutor, the melding of colours in from whites, blue, down to the hots and then out the other end. So much has been done now that the construction of the garden becomes so important in the winter. That's why you've got to cut the yews, cut the hedges, cut everything, get the hedges, get the structure in, and even in the winter, just a few dead plants will look good then, won't they? And but it is tricky. Like people who are very wealthy can shut off the borders, say, well, that's the iris and lupin border, and that's that, and that's that. We can't do this here either. So what we try to grow things that, like, salvias, things like that. It is difficult. It's not easy. It's not easy.
I think the more I learn, the more I realise how hard it is.
Very hard, very hard. And talking of colours, when there are colours in the garden, I think it's sometimes important with the formation of the border to not do it sort of stair like that. Put things at the back, put large things at the front as well as the back. To break it up. You can break it up a bit too. If any mistakes you put in aren't quite as obvious as the others, I think. But it's quite a nightmare. It's not easy. I congratulate you that you're doing it.
What are you most proud about creating Wollerton?
Oh, golly. I'm pleased that people I am genuinely pleased. Well, yes, I am. And sometimes you'll see, we've had people come who've got babies in pushchairs and things, and they've come and they're starting their new home, and they say, it's only small, but we could do that bit. For example, a little hosta alley. But I am proud of it. I'm proud that it gets some recognition now globally as well. For example, we have a lot of Japanese visits, and in fact, we're more famous in Japan than we are in Market Drayton. Yeah, but that tends to be the case. And yeah, I'm pleased that we meet celebrities like Chris and Roy
Chris
Strong.
comes quite often, doesn't he?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
really like Chris Beatrice.
Yes, and we've had Carol Klein's come, of course, and we had Toby Buckland. Yeah, I like Toby. I like him very much. My proudest moment in the whole thing was David Austin naming a rose after us.
I put it in this year as a dedication to the inspiration it's given us, and it's beautiful, isn't it?
Blushing.
In fact, I was smelling it this morning. It's just lovely.
Pretty. Yeah. No, I was so pleased, and it was funny, really, the story. He'd asked us to go over to his place for supper, and I had bronchitis badly, and John. I said, no, you go, John. So John went, and they were sitting around their kitchen table with him and his son, with David Jr. And David said to him, well, what are we going to call this rose then? And John said, what rose? What rose? He said, well, Wollerton Rose. John said, oh my God, he said, do you want to call it Lesley Jenkins? And John then said, do you want to call it? I said, no, absolutely, no. So it was a lovely surprise, and that was incredibly. I was incredibly proud of that, because I got to know David over 20 odd years, and I admired him as he was a gentleman, and absolutely dedicated to roses. In his memory, really, although we don't say it, we planted Wollerton Old Hall in 2 big beds. Looks pretty ghastly at the moment, but we've underplanted it with Ojuka Catlin's Giant, so that in the spring you'll have all the blue, not lavender, that's too passé. So so that's really for us to remember David.
I think Wollerton is every bit as iconic as Sissinghurst and Headcott and all the great dicks.
I don't think so.
I think it is, and I wonder what the lasting legacy will be of Wollerton Old Hall. It's I think you've created something bigger than you're very modest, but it really is. It's lovely.
It's too much to do. It's not right yet. I'm sorry, but it's not right. That does sound immodest, but it's not ready. It's not. It's so much. In fact, talking of that, we're coming up with and it's quite secret at the moment.
But you've always got another plan.
We've got another plan, a big plan this time, a really big plan. And I think that I sound like I am an old lady, but the advice I give you is, Roy Strong said to me, less is more, Lesley, less is more. And I was really, said, thank you, Roy, like that. Thank you, Roy. And he said, no, I'm being sensible now, that sort of thing, because he's such a carrier. But he's quite right. There's a temptation to put everything in. We've got that, so we'll put it there. What I'm doing now is, because of my absence, things have been put in. In fact, we've just moved a stone obelisk. Within one day, it had gone, and it's down the bottom now. Things like that, not being say, no, that's wrong. You can tell when it's wrong, can't you? You know when it's wrong, but sometimes you haven't got the time or the money to get somebody to do it, or
sometimes you just get used to it being there.
Yeah,
stop noticing it, don't you?
Yeah, so I try now lots of things are going to come out that shouldn't be there. Anyway,
I think that's really everything. Thank you so much.
Blabbered on.
No, not at all. And I think what my big takeaway is quite reassuring to hear you speak about how it's always evolving, because it sounds like us, doesn't it? There was another plan. We've got to do this and we've got to do that.
Yeah.
It will be lovely when we just do that, And I think as gardeners, we're perhaps all like that. That's why it gets better and better, because you're never quite happy.
Yeah.
So I hope you enjoyed that return to Wollerton as much as I did. Talking to Lesley, I find it so insightful, so reassuring as well. And I just want to thank Lesley for her time, giving up time, such a lovely, lovely lady. And it's a day that I will always remember. It's not often you get to meet your heroes, but I did on this occasion. So thank you very much to Lesley. And what I take away is the reassurance that perhaps we are doing things right. I've always assumed that Wollerton was designed in its entirety, and it was built to a plan, a kind of great plan. But Lesley assures me that it wasn't like that. It was very much chipping away, as we have done. It's just working on little areas at a time, and making mistakes, making lots of mistakes, and recognizing when you make a mistake and ripping out and starting again until you're happy with it, until the design is right. And that's the only way to learn. So I find that really, really nice and reassuring. It was Frederick Gibbard that said gardening is one of the most difficult art forms of all, because you're dealing with shape, texture, form, but as well as that, the hardest thing is you're dealing with time, and time, particularly in a garden, unlike perhaps in architecture or in interior design, where things kind of stay still or certainly for longer, last a bit longer. Gardening, it's always moving, always changing, and for that reason, as gardeners, we have to really adapt and change how we're doing things. And a garden is never ever finished; it's always moving forward, and it has to be that way. So perhaps as gardeners, we're sometimes slightly on the pessimist side, because we are always looking at things that perhaps aren't quite right and making those changes. So I thoroughly enjoyed that visit. I hope you did too, and join us again in the next video. Bye for now.